Judge Blackstone, I need to ask what's going on here.
Officer, he said I'm in trouble, but I didn't do anything.
This is official juvenile business, officer. Stay in your lane.
Sir, step back. I'm speaking with him.
The air in the Riverside Community Center that afternoon felt strangely electric. Amidst the usual after-school bustle, a quiet confrontation was unfolding. A respected local judge, Harold Blackstone, stood over a teenage boy, his voice a low, insistent murmur. "You're in trouble," the judge stated, his hand resting too close to the boy's shoulder. The teenager, Devin, visibly flinched, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the charged atmosphere. "Judge Blackstone, I need to understand what's happening here." A young uniformed officer stepped forward, his presence a stark, upright contrast to the judge's intimate posture. The judge turned, his smile dissolving into a cold, authoritarian mask. "This is official juvenile business. Officer, stay in your lane." The rookie officer, Marcus Rodriguez, didn't back down. "Sir, step back. I'm speaking with him." This was no minor disturbance. This was an immediate clash of power, an unnerving preview of systemic leverage being wielded in the open. That Tuesday morning, the weight of his newly issued badge felt heavier than usual for Officer Marcus Rodriguez. Just 24 and barely 3 weeks out of the police academy, he was eager to prove himself, to make a real difference in the community he had always called home. His upbringing instilled a clear sense of duty. His father's words echoed in his mind. "Respect isn't given. It's earned by doing the right thing, even when nobody's watching." Marcus knew every corner store, every park, every struggle in these neighborhoods. He was completely unaware that this ordinary patrol shift would lead him to uncover corruption reaching the highest levels of the city's judiciary. A scandal so profound, it would ultimately cost the city over $12 million in damages. The call came in at approximately 2:15 p.m. Dispatch reported a disturbance at the Riverside Community Center. For Marcus, this wasn't just another location. He had volunteered there throughout high school, helping kids with homework, organizing basketball games. It was a vital safe haven, offering tutoring, meals, and mentorship to dozens of teenagers after school. He expected the usual minor disagreements, a dispute over a game perhaps, or an argument about computer access. Instead, he found a scene that prickled his senses with an immediate sense of wrongness. Standing near the entrance was Judge Harold Blackstone. At 62, with over 15 years on the bench, Judge Blackstone was a pillar of the community, his reputation supposedly beyond reproach. He was known for his unyielding, tough-on-crime stance, lived in the city's affluent Hillrest neighborhood, and was often quoted in local papers championing law and order. Parents admired him, politicians sought his endorsement, and young lawyers viewed him as the embodiment of judicial integrity. But something about the scene contradicted this public image. The judge appeared agitated, speaking in hushed but urgent tones to a teenage boy. The boy, later identified as Devin Matthews, couldn't have been older than 16. He kept taking small, backward steps, subtly trying to increase the distance between himself and the judge. His body language screamed discomfort, a silent plea that Marcus, fresh from academy training, was taught to recognize. This boy was not just uneasy, he seemed trapped. At this juncture, the narrative could still have been dismissed as a misunderstanding. But Marcus was about to uncover a pattern far more insidious. Marcus approached slowly, his hand resting instinctively near his radio. He greeted Judge Blackstone politely, introducing himself and asking if everything was all right. The judge's demeanor instantly transformed. The agitated whispers vanished, replaced by the commanding presence Marcus had only heard described in court anecdotes. Judge Blackstone offered a warm smile, explaining he was merely conducting community outreach, checking on youth programs. Devin Matthews, a junior and honor roll student, remained absolutely silent during this exchange. He was at the center working on college applications, dreaming of an engineering scholarship. Yet something in Devin's eyes caught Marcus's attention. It wasn't outright fear, but a disquieting mix of confusion and distress that utterly failed to match the judge's smooth narrative of a routine visit. Marcus recognized that trapped look from prior domestic disturbance calls when victims desperately wanted to speak but felt utterly powerless. Judge Blackstone seemed suddenly eager to depart, citing urgent court business. But before leaving, he delivered a comment that would later become a critical piece of evidence. He informed Marcus that Devin had been causing problems at the center, disturbing other students, and being disrespectful to authority figures. The judge suggested Devin needed discipline, adding chillingly that kids like him often ended up in his courtroom if they weren't corrected early. It was a veiled warning wrapped in the guise of paternal concern, delivered by a man with absolute power over a young life. This was the exact moment control began to slip away from a powerful figure, unknowingly triggered by a rookie officer's intuition. Marcus thanked the judge for the information. However, he decided to stay and speak with others at the center. This decision, seemingly minor, was a pivotal turning point. It transformed a routine disturbance call into the nascent stages of an investigation that would shake the entire judicial system to its core. Marcus thanked the judge for the information. However, he decided to stay and speak with others at the center. This decision, seemingly minor, was a pivotal turning point. It transformed a routine disturbance call into the nascent stages of an investigation that would shake the entire judicial system to its core. He first spoke with Miss Patricia Williams, the community center's long-standing director with over 2 decades of dedicated service. Miss Williams expressed genuine surprise when Marcus mentioned Judge Blackstone's claims about Devin causing trouble. She described Devin as one of their most reliable volunteers, often staying late to help younger children with reading. Then, her demeanor shifted slightly. She mentioned that Judge Blackstone had been visiting the center more frequently in recent months. He always seemed to show a particular interest in the older teenage boys. Miss Williams appreciated his apparent commitment to youth outreach. Yet, something about his visits felt off to her. The boys he spoke with often seemed uncomfortable afterward. None had ever made a specific complaint, but their unease was palpable. What Miss Williams shared was not a complaint, but a crucial piece of the emerging puzzle. Marcus then approached several other teenagers present that day. Initially, they were hesitant to talk to a police officer, but Marcus's genuine approach and familiarity with the neighborhood eventually put them at ease. One 17-year-old Jamal recounted a peculiar encounter from the previous week. Judge Blackstone had approached him, asking personal questions about his family and offering special help with his legal troubles. The concerning detail, Jamal had no legal troubles. He was a straight-A student, without a criminal record, no pending cases, and no reason to be on any judge's radar. Yet Judge Blackstone seemed to possess intimate details about Jamal's life, information that should only be accessible through official channels or via an inappropriate investigation. Another teenager, 16-year-old Anthony, shared a remarkably similar experience. Judge Blackstone had offered to help him with a supposed juvenile record that Anthony vehemently denied existed. The judge had been disturbingly specific, mentioning dates and incidents that Anthony insisted never happened. When Anthony tried to correct him, Judge Blackstone became insistent, almost aggressive, claiming he had reviewed Anthony's file personally. The seemingly isolated incidents now began to coalesce into a deeply troubling pattern. Marcus began to connect the dots. Judge Blackstone was consistently targeting teenage boys from single-parent homes, minority families, or economically disadvantaged backgrounds. He would approach them with false claims about non-existent legal troubles. Then, he would offer to help resolve these fabricated problems, often suggesting private meetings. The teenagers, intimidated by his authority and confused by their supposed legal issues, frequently felt pressured to accept. The rookie officer faced a profound dilemma that would define his entire career. Before him was a highly respected judge, a celebrated pillar of the community, whose behavior was now raising multiple serious red flags. Accusing a sitting judge of misconduct was not a task a 3-week rookie undertook lightly. The political implications were enormous. The career risks were substantial. The potential for swift and severe retaliation was very real. Marcus remembered his father's words about doing the right thing, even when nobody was watching. But this situation was about everyone watching, especially those with the power to end his nascent law enforcement career before it truly began. Judge Blackstone held connections throughout the legal system, wielded influence with prosecutors, and commanded respect far beyond his courtroom. This decision, made by a rookie, would either define or prematurely end his career. Despite these overwhelming concerns, Marcus could not ignore what he was seeing. The pattern was too clear. The teenager's discomfort too genuine, and the judge's behavior too suspicious to dismiss. He made a decision requiring tremendous courage and potentially costing him everything he had worked for. Instead of simply filing a routine report and moving on, Marcus decided to dig deeper. He began meticulously documenting everything. Detailed notes captured each conversation, exact times and dates, and contact information for every witness. He photographed the community center layout and meticulously created a timeline of Judge Blackstone's visits. What Marcus uncovered next would shock the entire city. It would reveal a web of corruption reaching the highest echelons of the judicial system. Over the next several days, Marcus conducted what could only be described as the most thorough investigation of his young career. Working on his own time, often staying hours after his shift ended, he began piecing together a puzzle. It revealed something far more sinister than isolated incidents of inappropriate behavior. His first breakthrough came when he decided to visit the courthouse records department. Using his police credentials, Marcus requested information about recent juvenile cases handled by Judge Blackstone. What he found was deeply disturbing. Over the past 8 months, Judge Blackstone had processed an unusually high number of cases. These cases involved teenage boys who matched the exact demographic he had been targeting at the community center. The charges themselves followed a disturbing pattern. Young men from disadvantaged backgrounds suddenly faced charges for crimes they vehemently claimed they didn't commit: theft, vandalism, drug possession, disorderly conduct. The charges were serious enough to potentially derail their futures, but minor enough to avoid intense scrutiny from higher courts or media attention. The scope of the manipulation was beginning to reveal itself, far beyond simple misconduct. Marcus cross-referenced these court records with his detailed notes from the community center. The overlap was undeniable. At least 6 of the teenagers who had appeared before Judge Blackstone in recent months had also been approached by him at the community center weeks or even months before their arrests. The judge was apparently identifying vulnerable targets, learning about their personal situations, and then somehow manufacturing legal troubles for them. The evidence was circumstantial, yet the implications were chillingly clear. A high-ranking judge was deliberately preying on vulnerable youth, manipulating the system for reasons unknown. But Marcus knew he needed more than a pattern. He needed undeniable proof. Marcus knew he needed more than a pattern. He needed undeniable proof. He reached out to Detective Sarah Chen, a veteran investigator who had mentored him during his field training. Detective Chen, with 22 years of experience, had a reputation for handling sensitive cases with discretion and thoroughness. As Marcus meticulously explained his findings, her expression grew increasingly grave. Detective Chen agreed to help, but not without a stark warning. Judicial corruption cases were notoriously difficult to prosecute. They demanded extensive, unimpeachable evidence. More often than not, they resulted in career suicide for the officers brave enough to bring them forward. Judges held significant immunity for their official actions, possessed deep connections throughout the legal system, and commanded resources that most police officers simply couldn't match. The rookie's personal fight was about to become a battle against an entrenched system. Together, Marcus and Detective Chen developed a strategy to gather more concrete evidence. Detective Chen leveraged her contacts within the district attorney's office to quietly review more of Judge Blackstone's cases, extending their scope back 2 years. What they found was even more disturbing than Marcus had initially suspected. The pattern of manipulation extended much further back, involving dozens of young men who had been processed through Judge Blackstone's courtroom under questionable circumstances. Many of these cases shared chillingly consistent elements. The defendants were almost always represented by the same small group of public defenders. These attorneys rarely challenged the evidence presented or pushed for thorough investigations. Furthermore, the charges often relied heavily on testimony from a handful of specific police officers working in particular neighborhoods. Most disturbing of all, many of the young men had accepted plea bargains rather than risk a trial, even when they adamantly maintained their innocence. Marcus and Detective Chen began reaching out to some of these young men and their families. The stories they heard were heartbreaking and infuriating. 17-year-old Marcus Thompson had been charged with stealing electronics from a store where security cameras clearly showed he had never been present. Rather than fight the charges and risk a felony conviction, he had accepted a plea deal. This resulted in probation and community service, but irrevocably destroyed his chances of getting into college. Another case involved 18-year-old David Rodriguez, accused of spray painting graffiti on a community building. The evidence consisted solely of testimony from an officer who claimed to have witnessed the crime. Yet David had multiple witnesses confirming he was at work at the time. Faced with the possibility of jail time if convicted at trial, David also accepted a plea bargain. The depth of the judge's predatory system was becoming horrifyingly clear. The pattern was now undeniable and systematic. Judge Blackstone would identify vulnerable young men, often through his visits to community centers and youth programs. Somehow, these young men would then find themselves facing criminal charges based on questionable, often fabricated, evidence. Faced with the prospect of lengthy trials they couldn't afford and potential felony convictions that would ruin their futures, most accepted plea deals. These deals kept them under the supervision of the court system and thus under the judge's influence. But the most disturbing part was what happened after. These young men entered Judge Blackstone's system. Several reported being required to attend special counseling sessions or community service programs. These programs were personally overseen by the judge himself. These private meetings, often held in the judge's chambers or at remote locations, created opportunities for the kind of inappropriate contact that Marcus had witnessed at the community center. Detective Chen then managed to obtain financial records that revealed another crucial piece of the puzzle. Judge Blackstone had been receiving regular payments from several nonprofit organizations. These organizations supposedly provided counseling and rehabilitation services to at-risk youth. However, they existed primarily on paper, with minimal staff and questionable programming. The money flowed from state grants, intended to help disadvantaged young people, but very little actual service was being provided. The investigation had moved beyond individual acts of predatory behavior to expose a deep-seated financial scheme. Marcus realized they were looking at a systematic scheme of corruption that went far beyond what he had initially suspected. Judge Blackstone wasn't just abusing his authority for personal gratification. He was manufacturing cases, manipulating the legal system, and stealing public funds while preying on the most vulnerable members of the community. The rookie officer, who had simply wanted to serve and protect his neighborhood, had uncovered what prosecutors would later describe as one of the most elaborate judicial corruption schemes in the state's history. But gathering evidence was only the first challenge. Getting anyone to believe a 3-week rookie cop over a respected judge would require proof so overwhelming that it couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Marcus and Detective Chen knew they needed recorded evidence. They developed a plan to document Judge Blackstone's behavior directly. This plan, however, would require putting one of the teenagers at significant risk. After careful consideration and with the unwavering support of the teenager's family, they decided to have Devin Matthews wear a wire during his next encounter with the judge. Devin was terrified, but also determined to protect other young men from experiencing what he had endured. His mother, a strong woman who had worked multiple jobs to support her family, was furious when she learned what Judge Blackstone had been doing. She bravely agreed to let her son help with the investigation, despite the obvious and profound risks involved. The stage was set for a dangerous confrontation, where a single recording could dismantle an empire of corruption. The plan was simple, but fraught with danger. Devin would return to the community center and wait for Judge Blackstone's next visit. When the judge approached him, Devin would engage in conversation while wearing a discreet recording device provided by the police department. Marcus and Detective Chen would be nearby, out of sight, ready to intervene if the situation became threatening. What they recorded during that conversation would ultimately bring down not just Judge Blackstone, but an entire network of corruption that had been operating for years. The audio would reveal threats, admissions of evidence tampering, and explicit details about the systematic targeting of vulnerable young men. More importantly, it would provide the concrete proof needed to convince prosecutors and the public that this respected judge was actually a predator who had weaponized the legal system for his own dark purposes. The investigation was about to enter its most dangerous phase. The stakes would escalate dramatically, and the risks to everyone involved would become life-threatening. The investigation was about to enter its most dangerous phase. The stakes would escalate dramatically, and the risks to everyone involved would become life-threatening. The recording session took place on a Thursday afternoon when the community center was at its busiest. Children filled the main hall working on homework, while teenagers clustered around computer stations and game tables. The normal sounds of youth activities provided perfect cover for what was about to unfold. Devin arrived early, his hand shaking slightly as Detective Chen fitted him with the nearly invisible recording equipment. The wire was so small it could barely be seen, yet to Devin, it felt like a neon sign advertising his role in the investigation. Marcus positioned himself at a nearby coffee shop, offering a clear view of the community center entrance. Detective Chen took up position in an unmarked vehicle across the street. Judge Blackstone arrived at precisely 3:30 p.m., just as he had been doing for months. He parked his luxury sedan in the same spot, walked through the front doors with his usual confident stride, and immediately began scanning the room for his target. When his eyes landed on Devin, his face lit up with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. The predator had just walked into the trap, completely unaware of the wire. The conversation that followed would become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Judge Blackstone approached Devin with practiced ease, asking about school, family, and future plans. But within minutes, the discussion took a darker turn. The judge began referencing specific details about Devin's supposed criminal history, incidents that had never occurred, charges that had never been filed. When Devin expressed confusion about these alleged crimes, Judge Blackstone became more insistent. He claimed to have reviewed Devin's juvenile file personally, expressing disappointment that such a promising young man had gotten involved in criminal activity. The judge's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, making it clear that questioning his version of events would be unwise. Then came the moment that would seal Judge Blackstone's fate. He told Devin that these charges could be made to disappear, that his record could be wiped clean. But only if Devin was willing to cooperate with certain requirements. The judge's hand moved to Devin's shoulder as he explained that some young men needed special guidance, personal attention from someone who understood the system. The audio quality was crystal clear. Every word, every pause, every subtle threat was captured in perfect detail. Judge Blackstone went on to describe private counseling sessions that would take place in his chambers after court hours. He mentioned other young men who had benefited from his personal intervention, how their legal troubles had vanished once they learned to appreciate his help. The carefully constructed facade of community service crumbled with every recorded word. But Judge Blackstone wasn't finished. As if sensing that Devin might not be fully convinced, the judge decided to demonstrate his power more explicitly. He pulled out his phone and made a call to someone he addressed as Lieutenant Morrison. Marcus and Detective Chen listened in horror as Judge Blackstone fabricated a complaint about Devin causing problems at the community center. The judge claimed that Devin had been threatening other children, disturbing programs, and showing signs of escalating criminal behavior. He suggested that perhaps Devin needed to be picked up for questioning, that a night in juvenile detention might help him understand the seriousness of his situation. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, but it provided devastating evidence of how Judge Blackstone manufactured cases against his targets. When Judge Blackstone ended the call, he looked directly at Devin with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He explained that he had just solved Devin's immediate problem by preventing his arrest, but that this protection came with expectations. Devin would need to show proper gratitude for this intervention, and there were specific ways he could demonstrate his appreciation. The recording captured every detail of what happened next. Judge Blackstone described private meetings that would take place at his home. He explained that these sessions were necessary to ensure Devin stayed out of trouble. He mentioned other young men who had learned to value these special arrangements, how their lives had improved once they understood what was expected of them. The depth of the judge's systemic abuse was now irrefutably laid bare. Devin, remarkably, managed to keep the conversation going for nearly 20 minutes, gathering evidence that would prove invaluable in court. The judge, emboldened by his perceived control, revealed details about his operation that prosecutors could never have obtained through traditional investigation methods. He mentioned specific officers who helped him identify targets, court personnel who processed fabricated paperwork, and even other officials who received benefits from his schemes. When Judge Blackstone finally left the community center, Devin was visibly shaken but determined to see the investigation through. Marcus and Detective Chen immediately secured the recording equipment and began the meticulous process of transcribing every word. They knew they had captured something extraordinary, but they also understood that their real work was just beginning. The audio evidence was compelling, but prosecutors would need more than one recorded conversation to build an airtight case against such a powerful defendant. Judge Blackstone had been operating his scheme for years, had connections throughout the legal system, and possessed resources that could make prosecution extremely difficult. Marcus and Detective Chen would need to construct an unimpeachable case that could withstand the inevitable challenges and political maneuvering. Over the next several weeks, the investigation expanded dramatically. The recording had provided a detailed roadmap to Judge Blackstone's entire operation, revealing names, locations, and methods that investigators could follow up on. Detective Chen used her contacts to quietly gather evidence from multiple jurisdictions, while Marcus continued building relationships with victims and their families. They discovered that Judge Blackstone's corruption extended far beyond individual cases. He had been manipulating court schedules to ensure certain cases appeared before him. He had arranged for specific public defenders to be assigned to his targets. He had even influenced police patrol patterns to increase arrests in neighborhoods where he had identified potential victims. The tentacles of his influence reached further than anyone had imagined. The financial investigation revealed the true scope of the scheme. Over the past 3 years, Judge Blackstone had diverted more than $2 million in grant money intended for youth programs. The fake nonprofit organizations he controlled existed solely to funnel this money into his personal accounts, while providing virtually no services to the young people they were supposed to help. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of how many young men had been victimized by Judge Blackstone's system. The investigation ultimately identified 43 individuals who had been targeted, arrested on questionable charges, and processed through his courtroom. Many had accepted plea bargains to avoid trials they couldn't afford, resulting in criminal records that would follow them for life. The human cost was staggering. Several young men had lost college scholarships due to their criminal records. Others had been unable to find employment because of background check issues. Some had dropped out of school entirely, believing they were destined for lives of crime because a judge had told them they were criminals. Marcus began working with victim advocates to reach out to these young men and their families. Many were initially reluctant to come forward, fearing retaliation from someone they still viewed as having ultimate power over their lives. But as word spread about the investigation, more victims found the courage to share their stories. The testimonies were remarkably consistent. Judge Blackstone would identify vulnerable young men through community programs, manufacture evidence against them, and then offer to resolve their legal problems in exchange for personal favors. Those who refused his advances found their cases proceeding to trial with increasingly serious charges, while those who submitted to his demands saw their records mysteriously cleared. The collective weight of these stories was now forming an undeniable mountain of evidence. Detective Chen worked with federal investigators to examine similar patterns in neighboring jurisdictions. They discovered that Judge Blackstone had been sharing information with officials in other counties, potentially expanding his operation beyond his immediate territory. The scope of the corruption was becoming clear, but so was the immense challenge of prosecuting it. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself dealing with pressure from unexpected sources. Word of his investigation had begun to leak within the department, and not everyone supported his efforts to expose Judge Blackstone. Several senior officers warned him about the dangers of going after such a powerful figure, suggesting that rookie cops who caused trouble for respected judges often found their careers cut short. The pressure intensified when Marcus received a phone call at home from someone claiming to represent Judge Blackstone's interests. The caller suggested that young officers sometimes made mistakes in their eagerness to impress superiors, and that these mistakes could be overlooked if corrected quickly enough. The implied threat was clear, but Marcus refused to be intimidated. Detective Chen faced similar pressure from within her own department. She was called into meetings with supervisors who questioned the wisdom of pursuing such a high-profile case based on the testimony of troubled teenagers. Some suggested the investigation was a waste of resources that could be better spent on more conventional crimes. But both Marcus and Detective Chen understood that backing down now would mean abandoning the dozens of young men who had been victimized by Judge Blackstone's scheme. they had uncovered evidence of systematic corruption that demanded justice, regardless of the personal and professional costs they might face. The investigation had reached a critical mass, with forces both supporting and resisting its progress. The investigation reached a critical turning point when they received an unexpected phone call from Lieutenant Morrison, the officer Judge Blackstone had contacted during the recorded conversation with Devon. Morrison had been reviewing his files and discovered several cases where he had received similar calls from the judge requesting arrests or investigations of specific individuals. Morrison revealed that he had always found these requests unusual, but had followed them because they came from such a respected figure. Now, understanding the true nature of Judge Blackstone's motives, he was willing to provide testimony about how the judge had manipulated law enforcement to target innocent young men. This breakthrough led to the identification of several other officers who had unknowingly participated in Judge Blackstone's scheme. Most were horrified to learn how their actions had been manipulated, and several agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Their testimony would prove crucial in demonstrating the systematic nature of the corruption. The evidence was becoming overwhelming, but Marcus and Detective Chen knew they would face their greatest challenge when they finally presented their case to prosecutors. Judge Blackstone remained a powerful figure with connections throughout the legal system, and convincing a district attorney to prosecute a sitting judge would require extraordinary proof of guilt. The moment of truth was approaching, and everyone involved understood that the outcome would determine not only Judge Blackstone's fate, but also whether justice could prevail against corruption at the highest levels of the legal system. The moment of truth was approaching, and everyone involved understood that the outcome would determine not only Judge Blackstone's fate, but also whether justice could prevail against corruption at the highest levels of the legal system. The case against Judge Blackstone went to trial 18 months later. The meticulously gathered evidence, spearheaded by a rookie officer's courage and a veteran detective's expertise, proved overwhelming. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: corruption, abuse of office, fraud, and civil rights violations. Judge Blackstone, once a symbol of integrity, was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay full restitution to his victims, a symbolic but crucial acknowledgement of the harm he inflicted. Justice, for so long delayed, was finally delivered, echoing the quiet determination of those who sought it. The city, meanwhile, faced a massive civil lawsuit. It was filed on behalf of the 43 young men whose lives had been irrevocably damaged by the corruption scheme. Rather than fight the case and risk even larger damages and public outcry, city officials agreed to a settlement totaling $12.7 million. Each victim received compensation for the profound harm done to their futures, their reputations, and their fundamental trust in the justice system. The financial toll underscored the devastating human cost of Blackstone's avarice and abuse. Marcus Rodriguez became the youngest officer in department history to receive the Medal of Valor. His career, once on the brink of premature termination, was now celebrated as a testament to unwavering integrity. Detective Chen was promoted to lieutenant and now heads the department's public corruption unit. Her experience and dedication became a foundation for systemic change. The Riverside Community Center, where this all began, installed a plaque honoring the courage it takes to stand up for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. It serves as a permanent reminder that vigilance is always necessary. The visible victories were clear, but the unseen damage lingered. However, the most profound outcome of this case transcended individual accolades and financial settlements. It sent an undeniable message to corrupt officials everywhere. Power without accountability is not power at all. It is merely borrowed time. And sometimes all it takes is one person willing to do the right thing to bring down an entire system of corruption. The case was a brutal awakening for the city, exposing vulnerabilities within its judicial system. It forced a reevaluation of oversight mechanisms, the training of public defenders, and the scrutiny applied to juvenile cases. New protocols were implemented to ensure greater transparency and accountability, aiming to prevent similar abuses from ever taking root again. Yet, despite these systemic improvements, the scars on the community remained. The legal system had delivered its verdict, but could true healing ever be achieved? How many other communities might harbor similar hidden systems of exploitation? How many other respected figures might be operating in the shadows, preying on the vulnerable, secure in their connections and perceived immunity? The Blackstone case raised a haunting question. Was this an isolated, a monstrous aberration, or merely a highly visible symptom of a deeper, more pervasive systemic flaw? The resolution brought a measure of justice, but the underlying vulnerability to such corruption, the very human tendency to defer to authority without question, still lingers. It serves as a chilling reminder that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing, tireless endeavor, demanding constant vigilance and the unwavering courage to challenge even the most powerful.